Imagine standing in London nearly 3 centuries ago, when the city was growing faster than almost anywhere else in the world. The London of the 1700s was a place of powerful contrasts, a booming metropolis, yet chaotic and crowded. The River Thames was the city's lifeline, crowded with sailing ships bringing goods from every corner of the British Empire. Dominating the skyline was St. Paul's Cathedral. Completed in 1710 after the Great Fire, it became a symbol of resilience and renewal. Nearby, the monument served as a reminder of the disaster that reshaped the city and forced it to grow in new ways. The old London Bridge still crossed the water, uniquely lined with houses and shops, creating a bustling street suspended above the river. Through these reconstructions, we can travel back and observe London as its residents once did. History truly comes alive. This remarkable view captures London during the height of its Georgian prosperity. The city was steadily transforming from its medieval roots into the capital of a powerful global empire. A place where trade, architecture, and ambition were reshaping the future of Britain. As London continued to grow during the 18th century, some of the most remarkable views of the city could be found outside its crowded center. One of the most famous perspectives came from One Tree Hill in Greenwich Park. From this elevated position, visitors in the mid-1700s could look northwest across the landscape toward London and see the capital gradually spreading along the River Thames. The view combined natural beauty with signs of Britain's growing power, making it one of the most admired panoramas in the country. Standing on this hill today carries special significance because of what would later happen there. In 1884, Greenwich was chosen as the location of the prime meridian, the reference line from which all longitude across the globe is measured. This decision effectively made Greenwich the geographic center of world timekeeping and navigation. But in the 18th century, visitors did not yet realize that this quiet hill would one day hold such global importance. For them, the location simply offered one of the finest views in England. Below the hill stood one of the most elegant architectural arrangements in Britain. The graceful Queen's House sat at the center of the scene, framed by the impressive colonnades of Greenwich Hospital. This grand complex had been completed in 1751 and served as a retirement home for sailors who had spent their lives serving in the Royal Navy. Britain's maritime strength depended heavily on these men, and the hospital was designed to provide them with comfort and dignity in their later years. The buildings themselves were masterpieces of design. Much of the original vision came from Sir Christopher Wren, the same architect responsible for St. Paul's Cathedral, while Nicholas Hawksmoor contributed to the completion of the project. Together they created an architectural statement that celebrated Britain's dominance at sea. The sweeping colonnades, balanced proportions, and impressive scale of the complex reflected the nation's pride in its naval power and global influence. Greenwich also served as a gateway to London for ships arriving from distant waters. Merchant vessels traveling up the Thames passed this point before reaching the crowded docks of the capital. From the height of One Tree Hill, visitors could watch ships slowly approaching the city, their sails visible against the horizon. The river below functioned as the primary route through which goods from across the world entered London. In the foreground of many 18th-century paintings of this view, well-dressed figures can often be seen admiring the landscape. These visitors represent the fashionable society of the time. For them, enjoying scenic prospects was an important part of leisure and culture. Gentlemen and ladies dressed in elegant clothing would gather in places like Greenwich Park to walk, talk, and appreciate the beauty of the countryside surrounding the capital. Writers and artists were equally fascinated by this location. Over the centuries, countless painters attempted to capture the sweeping panorama of the Thames, the hospital buildings, and the distant outline of London itself. The view became so well known that it was frequently described as one of the most impressive in all of England. Remarkably, the scene has changed very little since those early depictions. Modern visitors standing on the same hill today can still recognize the arrangement of buildings and the general shape of the landscape almost exactly as it appeared in the 18th century. This rare continuity offers a powerful reminder of how certain places can preserve the memory of history. But while the calm surroundings of Greenwich provided peaceful views of the growing capital, life within London itself was far more energetic and complex. Moving closer to the heart of the city, we arrive at one of the most fashionable residential areas of Georgian London, Leicester Square. By the middle of the 18th century, Leicester Square had become one of the most fashionable residential areas in London. Located in the growing West End, the square attracted members of the aristocracy, as well as some of the most influential cultural figures of the era. What had once been open farmland outside the older parts of the city gradually transformed into an elegant neighborhood designed for wealthy residents. At the heart of the square stood Leicester House, a grand residence built in 1635 for the Earl of Leicester. Over time, the house gained even greater importance when it became home to several members of the royal family. One of its most notable residents was Frederick, Prince of Wales. Because of these royal connections, Leicester Square quickly developed a reputation as an address associated with prestige and influence. The square also attracted remarkable artistic talent. Among the residents was the famous painter and satirist William Hogarth. He lived and worked at number 31 on the right side of the square. Hogarth was one of the most influential artists in Britain, known for his paintings that captured the social realities of 18th-century life. Across the square at number 47, another legendary artist would later establish his studio. Sir Joshua Reynolds opened his portrait studio there in 1760. Reynolds became one of the most respected portrait painters in Britain and eventually served as the first president of the Royal Academy of Arts. From his studio in Leicester Square, he painted many of the most powerful and influential figures of the age. At the center of the square stood a striking equestrian statue of King George I. The statue had been erected in 1753. It served as a symbol of royal authority, as well as a decorative centerpiece for the carefully planned public space. Surrounding it were elegant houses that faced inward toward the square, giving residents views of the landscaped grounds. The transformation of Leicester Fields into Leicester Square reflected a broader trend happening across London during the Georgian period. Wealthy developers began building planned residential squares that combined elegant architecture with shared green spaces. These squares offered a more organized and refined living environment compared with the crowded and irregular streets of older parts of the city. For a time, Leicester Square represented the height of fashionable London society. Aristocrats hosted gatherings, artists built their reputations, and influential figures passed through the neighborhood regularly. However, the character of the square would not remain the same forever. Within only a few decades, many wealthy residents began moving further west as London expanded. As the aristocracy gradually left the area, Leicester Square slowly evolved into a different kind of district. Entertainment venues, theaters, and other attractions began to replace private residences. The transformation marked an important shift in the cultural life of London, turning what had once been a quiet, aristocratic neighborhood into one of the city's centers of public entertainment. While places like Leicester Square reflected the refined side of Georgian society, the River Thames continued to dominate the daily life of the city. Moving back toward the water, we arrive at one of the most powerful symbols of royal authority in England. Rising along the north bank of the river stood the Tower of London, a fortress whose history stretched back centuries and whose presence still commanded respect. From the perspective of the south bank of the Thames, the Tower of London appeared both imposing and strategic. For more than 700 years, this fortress had controlled access to the city from the river. Its massive stone walls stood as a clear demonstration of royal power and authority, reminding anyone approaching London that the crown maintained control. From the southern bank of the River Thames, the Tower of London appeared as one of the most powerful symbols of authority in the entire city. Its massive stone walls and heavy fortifications stood directly beside the river, dominating the approach to London for centuries. Anyone arriving by water would see the fortress long before reaching the busy docks. For over 700 years, it served as a defensive stronghold and royal statement. At the center of the complex stood the White Tower, the oldest and most imposing structure within the fortress. Construction of this massive Norman keep began in 1078 under the orders of William the Conqueror. The building was constructed using Caen stone imported from northern France, a material chosen both for its strength and for the prestige it represented. Even in the 18th century, the White Tower remained one of the most recognizable buildings in London, its thick walls reminding residents of the city's history. By the Georgian period, the Tower of London served several functions. It was still a royal palace, although monarchs rarely lived there. It also operated as a prison, an armory, a mint for producing coins, and a secure location where the crown jewels were stored. Few places in Britain held such a combination of political, military, and symbolic importance. One of the most famous features of the Tower complex was its riverside entrance known as Traitor's Gate. Prisoners accused of crimes against the crown were often brought into the fortress through this water gate after arriving by barge on the Thames. The river therefore became the final path for many individuals whose stories later became part of English history. Among those who passed through this entrance were Anne Boleyn, the second wife of King Henry VIII, and Sir Thomas More. Both were later executed after being held within the tower. The river surrounding the fortress was constantly busy with activity. Numerous sailing vessels traveled along the Thames. Royal barges, merchant ships, and small transport boats moved up and down the river each day. The Thames served not only as a natural defensive barrier for the tower, but also as London's most important transportation route. Every vessel that passed beneath the fortress walls did so under the watchful presence of this historic stronghold. While the tower represented military power, another location symbolized a very different kind of influence. In the heart of London's commercial district stood the Royal Exchange, representing international trade and finance. The courtyard of the Royal Exchange in the 18th century was one of the busiest places in the entire city. Founded in 1565 by Sir Thomas Gresham, the building was modeled after the famous trading centre in Antwerp. It became England's first purpose-built space for commerce, connecting London to global markets. Trading sessions took place twice daily and were marked by the ringing of a bell in the tower. When the bell sounded, merchants filled the open space to negotiate deals and arrange shipments. The atmosphere was energetic and fast-moving, with conversations taking place in many different languages. The surrounding galleries housed shops that sold luxury goods, books, and valuable imports. These walkways also became home to insurance businesses such as Lloyd's of London. They helped merchants protect their valuable cargo during long and risky sea voyages. This building played a critical role in transforming London into one of the world's leading financial centers. It inspired the development of financial districts across the globe, from New York to Hong Kong. But the city's transformation was not limited to commerce. In another part stood St. James's Square. During the mid-18th century, this square represented the very peak of aristocratic life in the city. It was an address reserved for the most powerful members of society, including dukes and senior politicians. St. James's Square had first been developed in the 1660s as part of London's westward expansion. Wealthy landowners recognized the demand for elegant residential spaces away from the crowded city. These large townhouses were designed to display the wealth and status of Britain's most prominent figures. By the 1720s, the appearance of the square was significantly improved through the work of royal gardener Charles Bridgeman. His redesign brought order and elegance to the central garden area. One of the most notable additions was a large ornamental basin, measuring roughly 150 feet across. Surrounding the basin stood 8 stone obelisks fitted with decorative lamps enclosed in ornamental ironwork. These features gave the square a refined and carefully planned appearance that matched the prestige of the surrounding residences. Before Bridgman's redesign, however, the square had been far less impressive. Residents had complained that the area was muddy, poorly maintained, and lacking the elegance expected from such an exclusive address. Contemporary descriptions even referred to the square as being in great disorder, which embarrassed the wealthy families who lived there. The improvements transformed the space into a more suitable setting for aristocratic society. In the distance beyond the square, the spire of St. James's Church could be seen rising above the surrounding buildings. The church served as a spiritual center for the neighborhood and reflected the strong connection between religious institutions and daily life. Over time, however, the character of St. James's Square would gradually change. As the city expanded and economic activity increased, many of the grand houses were converted into offices, clubs, and institutional buildings. The quiet residential atmosphere eventually gave way to the business and professional environment that defines the area today. Moving eastward from the aristocratic squares of the West End, we arrive at one of the busiest commercial streets in Georgian London, Cheapside. The name of the street comes from the Old English word cheap, which originally meant marketplace. For centuries, this area had served as one of the main trading centers of the city. Even in the 18th century, Cheapside remained one of the most active and prosperous streets in London. Rising above the busy roadway stood the elegant steeple of St. Mary-le-Bow Church, designed by Sir Christopher Wren. The bells of this church were famous throughout the city. In fact, being born within the sound of the Bow bells was traditionally what defined a true Cockney Londoner. Cheapside was lined with shops selling an astonishing range of goods. Merchants displayed silk fabrics, jewelry, and books. Spices and other valuable products imported from around the world were showcased here. The street functioned as one of the most important retail districts in London. Many of the shop spaces along Cheapside were among the most expensive commercial properties anywhere in the city. For merchants and traders, Cheapside represented opportunity. Wealthy business owners built fortunes there. They built fortunes by negotiating deals, selling imported goods, and supplying London's rapidly growing population. The street combined the energy of a marketplace with the financial ambition of a commercial center. In many ways, Cheapside represented both the commercial strength and the entrepreneurial spirit that helped London rise to global prominence. The remarkable scenes we can observe today through historical engravings and paintings offer only brief glimpses of that vibrant past. Thousands of visual records survive, capturing moments from cities around the world like snapshots frozen in time. These engravings provide an extraordinary window into the past, especially in 18th-century London. At that time, the capital was expanding rapidly, transforming from a medieval town into the center of a global empire. Modern technology now allows us to reconstruct these scenes with surprising clarity using artificial intelligence. We can revisit the crowded Thames filled with trading ships and the elegant squares of the West End. Powerful symbols like the Tower of London become part of a living city once again. By studying these images, we gain insight into the ambitions and daily experiences of those who lived then. Many buildings have disappeared, but landmarks like St. Paul's Cathedral still link us to our history. This same technology can be applied to thousands of other historic cities across the globe. If we could bring another historical city back to life, which one should it be?